All right, y'all. Give me just a second to let's see. Give me just a second to do some switching around here, and so I can get my PowerPoint up. All right. It is once again, as always, good to be with everybody, and I know that with the way that we're doing things. We always have some kind of technology hiccup. Even on mornings, I think that it's all good and all perfect. Something happens, but we are good and going, and I'm glad that we could be together through social media and through YouTube, and to be able to worship God this morning. And I hope and I pray that the lesson that we look at this morning will be beneficial to you. And that we can be edified too through this time. Well, this morning we are going to be talking a little bit about heaven. And, you know, heaven is an interesting concept to talk about because it obviously is a place that we have never, ever seen before. And oftentimes, whenever we never see the end result, or we never see really the goal of which we're trying to strive for, sometimes the motivation in order to get to that end goal is a little bit challenging, isn't it? And I think that that's our human side looking at that end goal of heaven, because we live in the here and now. We live under earthly consequences. We live with earthly blessings and curses. And so the spiritual side of things sometimes is very difficult to understand and to grasp. And therefore, our motivation sometimes just is not where it should be when it comes to striving for a home in heaven. And with that being said, I think whenever we look at anything when it starts to get hard, don't we often wonder if the end result is actually worth it? Whenever something is taking us a while, or when something is super, super challenging, when something hurts in order to accomplish that thing, sometimes we just throw our hands up in the air and we say, I don't know if I want to finish this. I don't think that I have the capability to see this through. But here's one thing that I want all of us to remember, is that anytime anyone has ever accomplished anything worth knowing and anything great on this earth, it has been quite the challenge. I want just for a moment to take a look at the individual that hopefully you can see really well on your screen. Mr. Thomas Edison, one of the greatest inventors to have ever lived. Whenever we look around this room, whenever I look around the room that me and my family are in right now, but whenever you look around the room maybe that you're in right now, you see probably the result of more than one invention that Thomas Edison had come up with. He was quite the brilliant mind. But the one thing that he is most known for is the invention of the light bulb. And Thomas Edison is actually quoted as saying that he found 10,000 ways not to make a light bulb. What was he saying there? He estimates that he failed about 10,000 times in order to come to his one success in inventing a light bulb. And of course, how many light bulbs do we have in our homes nowadays? We depend on those things so much. And so I am super glad that he did not quit. But I want us to think about another quote that Thomas Edison also said. And that was this, that many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success whenever they gave up. I understand that this particular example might be best in a sermon in talking about how failure is something that happens, but we can get back up from it. But I really want us to look at this in the context of how we have this goal, or hopefully we have this goal, to one day be in heaven with God. But sometimes that goal is so hard to see for us. Maybe it's so hard for us to imagine that we really stop short of attaining that goal. Or maybe we don't take life serious enough in that realm. Do we really portray that heaven is a place that is going to be worth it for us? That it's going to be worth all of the sorrows that we befall here on this earth? Will heaven be worth all of the challenges daily that we face when it comes to our faith? I want us to look at 3 ways in which I believe heaven will be worth it all. And of course, I could go many other directions. I could give many other reasons. But I want us to focus on 3 things this morning. First of all, I want us to understand, or one thing I want us to understand about heaven, is that heaven is a place that is beyond our comprehension in substance and beauty. You know, whenever we think about places that we want to go to, places that we want to see, landmarks, wonders of the world, all of these things that we might put on our bucket list in our life, we do so because whenever we go visit these places, like the Grand Canyon, we look at these places and we have a sense of awe. We have a sense of wonder. We have this thought of unbelievableness of what we're able to see at this moment with our own eyes. Because of its beauty, its massiveness, and its just sheer awesomeness. Things that we can't really comprehend of how these things are even there. Well, that's really how we ought to look at heaven. In understanding that this is going to be a place that we can one day experience that will put us into eternal awe and wonder. You know, we can't even imagine what kind of new dwelling place this will be. We can't imagine this new dwelling place. I want to take a look at 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 9, where Paul is talking to the Corinthian church here, obviously, and he says, "But it is written, what no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor the heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who love Him." He says, if you love God, and of course, obviously, Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. So we've got to strive to do those things even when life gets hard, even when life gets challenging. But Paul says, if you endure those things, if you overcome those things, then you are going to dwell in a place that is unimaginable, uncomprehendable. That certainly is a place that I would want to see. Hebrews 11 and verse 16 tells us that it will be a better country and a beautiful city. No matter how it is described with physical terms as the book of Revelation tries to do so well, as John is given that window into heaven and able to see it. Even though he tries with human words to describe this place, he still can't quite get the magnitude of greatness and awesomeness that this place really is. You know, when I was a kid, when I was much younger, anytime I experienced something for the very first time, when it was new, it was absolutely awesome. Now, most of y'all know I grew up in Evansville, Indiana, and Evansville's not necessarily a small city. I mean, it's quite a large city of about 120,000 people. But most of my young life, I spent in a city no bigger than that. When I was 11 years old, though, my family and I had the opportunity one summer to take a vacation up to New York. And I had never seen a skyline like New York before. As a matter of fact, probably the largest skyline I'd ever seen was Nashville, Tennessee, which, when I was 11 years old, it wasn't quite as big as what it is now. But when I went into New York City, and especially whenever I saw New York City at night, looking at all of those skyscrapers, looking at all of those buildings, as an 11-year-old boy, just brought a sense of awe over me. And then getting the opportunity to go up into the Empire State Building, to the 103rd floor, which was basically at the base of the needle of that building. And to be able to see the landscape for miles, and to see all of the lights, and to see all the things that man was able to accomplish in what mankind has been able to construct. It was absolutely awesome as an 11-year-old boy. Now, as a 40-year-old man, who knows? Since it's been so long since I've been there, I might go there with the exact same wonder, or I might just say, oh, well, okay, those are buildings. I've seen buildings before. But when all things are made new, and whenever we have a home in heaven, that home in heaven is going to be eternal, but everything is going to stay new. Everything's going to stay new and stay wonderful. We can't even imagine how awesome that's going to be. Heaven's going to be beyond our comprehension in substance and beauty. But also, I want us to understand that even our bodies will be of a different nature. Everything's going to be different from what it is now. And one thing I can say is that our new bodies, even though I don't know what they're going to look like necessarily, I have to remember that these exist in a spiritual realm. Our bodies are going to be of a different nature. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 1, here Paul says, "For we know that if the tent that is our earthly home is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens." We're reminded every single day through the body aches and pains that we might experience, through the sicknesses that we have, through the emotions that we experience that sometimes really drag us down. We're reminded every single day that these bodies have a lot of flaws in them. They have a lot of problems in them. And it's not because God made them that way. It's because we live in a world that is full of sin, and we are told that because sin entered the world, death also has come. And part of that lead up to death is oftentimes a lot of the pain and the sickness that our bodies do endure. Our bodies, our physical bodies, go through a lot. But we also have an eternal body. We have a body that will exist for eternity. And we'll be raised up and resurrected in those bodies eventually. And those bodies will never cease to exist, and those bodies will never have pain and never have suffering. Heaven is beyond our comprehension in substance and beauty. And that includes our new bodies. Secondly, this morning, when we think about heaven, heaven is an investment. It's an inheritance. So it is something that has been gifted and given to us, but it's also something that as an investment, that the fact that we have the opportunity to spend eternity in heaven, that investment is something that we need to take care of, that we need to watch over, that we need to make sure that we are doing our best to live that investment up and to continue to deposit into that investment. And we need to do that instead of worrying about and depositing earthly things into something that is going to be done away with, that is not going to last forever. Matthew 6, verses 19 through 21, Jesus said this so lovingly and greatly, but he was also very to the point. He says, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." What's Jesus saying here? Everything that you own, all of your earthly treasures, all of those things are going to deteriorate. And we see that. You know, we get new things, we get new stuff all the time. But after a year has gone by, and a year, especially if you've been using something for a year, it's not so new anymore. It gets dirty. It gets broken. It breaks down. It kind of goes beyond its usefulness in some ways. And so that's what happens to earthly things. That's what happens to those things. And I'm sorry I didn't have the passages up on the screen. Y'all know I do that sometimes. But I also want us to look at Hebrews 13 and verse 14. In that passage, the writer tells us that here we don't have a lasting city. But he says, or the writer here says, we seek the city that is to come. The cities that we see around us, whenever I look at New York City, whenever I see all of that great architecture, well, those buildings are not going to last forever. Those buildings right now, they're maintained. There's a special group of people that have to maintain these buildings every single year for them to at least last for some of the generations to come. But when this world is over, and when Jesus comes, those buildings are not going to be anymore. So the writer says, seek the city that is to come. We need to understand that that is our investment, our home in heaven. And we need to hope, we should hope in an unchangeable inheritance. An inheritance that is unchangeable. 1 Peter 1 verses 3 through 5 was the scripture reading that I had on the title slide a while ago, and I know that we didn't read it, but I want to encourage you to read it in its entirety. But this passage talks about an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading. And we're told that it is kept in heaven for us. It's kept in heaven for us. It's reserved for us. God is making sure that it is maintained for us. And of course, there's no deterioration up there. There's no defilement. So that's probably a pretty easy job. But isn't it great to know that we have that security, that inheritance that we have to look forward to? What God has promised about heaven will absolutely remain. It absolutely will be there whenever we get there, if we stay the course and if we keep on striving as best as we can. And when all is said and done, I understand that living this life, especially living a life for God, is absolutely exhausting. It is exhausting. We get tired sometimes. We get downtrodden. We get hurt. But we need to understand that God put a lot of symbolism in His Word. Whenever we look at Israel and we look at how everything was set up, we need to understand that heaven is a place of rest. Heaven is a place of eternal rest. And that's what we have to look forward to. Heaven in and of itself will be like a Sabbath rest from all of our work. Isn't it great how we have that symbolism of what the Jews experienced on Saturdays? They would rest just like God rested from creation after making everything done and making everything complete. God rested. And He told the Israelites, remember the Sabbath and keep that day holy. You are to do no work on that day. We'll take a look at what it says in Hebrews 4, verses 9 and 10. So then, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works, as God did from His. You see, if we work heartily for the Lord, if we put Him first in our lives, if we spread the gospel, if we continue to serve Him in every aspect of our life, no matter what we go through and no matter how hard things might get, we will be able to enter a Sabbath rest for eternity. That's the difference in this Sabbath rest, is it never ends. Whereas the Israelites, after the Sabbath day, the next day, they had to go back to work. They had to start things all over again for the next week. Well, in this particular Sabbath rest, that will never, ever have to happen. I also want us to take a look at how John was told of the rest that will be given for those who have been persecuted. He was told of the rest for the persecuted in heaven. So I want to take a look at Revelation 7, verses 15 through 18. And here, as John is looking into heaven and as he's observing these things, one of the elders that was surrounding the throne of God says this: Therefore they are before the throne of God, and serve Him day and night in His temple. And He who sits on the throne will shelter them with His presence. They shall hunger no more, neither thirst any more. The sun shall not strike them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb in the midst of the throne will be their shepherd, and He will guide them to springs of living water. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. I want y'all to think of the absolute comfort that this is portraying for all those who have and for all those who will die in the Lord. For all those who will leave this earth in having a relationship with the Father. All of these things that created challenges and hardships for the child of God, all of these things will be taken away. All of these things will be protected from. God will give and will offer that protection. I don't know about you, but to me, heaven will surely be worth it all. Because it will be a place that even though things get tough and get hard here, I will be able to rest with my Father. I'll be able to rest with my Jesus. I'll be able to rest with the Holy Spirit. Have no more pain or suffering. And no more hardships. I want to thank you all for being on here with us this morning. And as I always do, I don't have a slide for it this time. But I do want to remind you that even though we cannot offer a song of invitation at this time, normally we would invite anyone who needed to come forward for prayers or to respond to the gospel, to be baptized into Christ, to have sins washed away, or maybe those who have gotten away from the Lord for them to be restored. We would offer that opportunity. But just because we can't do that physically doesn't mean that we cannot respond to the gospel. And if you have a need to do that, even if it is just for a prayer request, I want you to know and understand that I'm available to talk and I'm available to text. And if you need that, you can contact me at 270-970-1620. And I would love to chat with you. And I would love to pray with you. And I'd even love to be able to put a mask on and to go baptize you into Christ.